Hey, what's going on? So today we're going to be talking about Palworld version 0.6.6, the newest update that just rolled out and has everyone in the community curious about what's changed, what's improved, and whether this patch is a step in the right direction or just one of those smaller tweaks that doesn't really shake the game too much. I want to take you through this in a way that feels natural, almost like you and I are just hanging out and chatting about the game. Because honestly, when these updates come out, a lot of us like to know not just the raw patch notes, but also what it actually means for players who are logging in every day and grinding their way through. Now, first things first, this update hit on September 17th, 2025, which is honestly pretty exciting because it shows that the developers are sticking to their promise of actively supporting the game even months after launch. That's huge because one of the worries with these early access type games is whether the devs will continue to polish and expand or whether updates will slow down and the hype fades. With 0.6.6, we're seeing that there's still some active work going on. Sure, it's not one of those massive feature-heavy updates with entirely new mechanics or worlds, but it's a solid patch that adds refinements, quality of life changes, and some balance adjustments that can actually make a difference if you've been frustrated with certain aspects of combat or system performance. One of the very first things you'll notice if you launch the game after updating is that there's now a warning system tied to your world settings. Basically, if you've set the game up in a way that's too demanding for your hardware, the game will tell you up front. That might not sound flashy, but think about how many players out there constantly fiddle with their settings, trying to strike the right balance between visuals and performance. Palworld can be deceptively heavy depending on how large your world is, how many creatures are active, and what's going on in the environment. So, the fact that the game now actively warns you instead of letting you suffer through stutters or crashes is a nice little safeguard, especially for new players who might not even realize their hardware is being pushed too far. It's the type of subtle change that doesn't grab headlines, but quietly makes the experience smoother for a lot of people. Now, probably the most interesting change from a gameplay standpoint is what happened with the Herbal Pulse skill. If you've ever been in combat and gotten knocked down, you know how vulnerable you can be during that awkward getting up animation. Enemies just love to punish you right there, and sometimes it feels unfair, like you barely had a chance to recover before you're slapped right back into the dirt. With 0.66, that's been tweaked so that when you're getting up, you now have a brief window of invincibility. This is honestly a lifesaver. It might not sound like a big thing on paper, but in practice, it smooths out combat flow and reduces that frustration of feeling completely helpless. It makes the game feel a little fairer without making it too easy, because you still need to avoid getting knocked down in the first place, but at least you're not locked into that cycle of being punished just for trying to stand up. The developers also gave some love to weapon balance, specifically with Excalibur and the Terra Blade. For Excalibur, the hit detection area of its shockwave has been slightly expanded. This is one of those adjustments that shows the devs are paying attention to how skills actually land in real gameplay situations. Before, you might swing, release that shockwave, and feel like it should have connected, but it didn't, because the hitbox was just a little too narrow. Expanding that area gives you a more consistent experience and makes the weapon feel as powerful as it's meant to. It's not overpowered, but it's more reliable now, which matters a ton in fast-paced fights where consistency is everything. Then there's the Terra Blade, which had an issue with its visual effects not lining up properly with the actual hit detection. You'd see the flashy animation and assume it covered a certain area, but in reality, the hitbox didn't quite match. That kind of disconnect is annoying because it breaks immersion and makes you feel like you're guessing instead of relying on what you see. Fixing that alignment makes the weapon more satisfying to use. It's one of those polish level adjustments where after playing with the updated version, you can't help but think, yeah, this feels right now. Now, one of the things I love to do with updates like this is step back and ask, what does it mean for the game as a whole? Because a patch like 0.6.6 might not be full of flashy new features, but it tells us a story about where the devs are focusing their energy. They're clearly looking at quality of life and balance, which suggests they're listening to community feedback. When people complain about frustrating mechanics like getting punished while standing up, and then that gets addressed in a patch, it shows a feedback loop is happening. And for any live service or ongoing development game, that feedback loop is crucial to keeping the player base engaged and optimistic about the future. Another thing worth mentioning is how updates like this help stabilize the foundation of the game before bigger expansions hit. If you're building a house, you don't just keep adding rooms while the foundation is cracked. You fix those cracks first, Make sure the structure is solid, and then you can confidently expand. I see this patch as part of that process, making sure the combat feels fair, making sure weapons behave consistently, and making sure the technical side doesn't sabotage the experience. That way, when the devs do roll out new content, it's sitting on a foundation that feels good. And let's be real. We all know Palworld has been one of those titles that people compare to a mix of survival crafting and monster catching, which means expectations are always high. Updates like this keep momentum going. Even if you're not logging in every single day, just seeing that the devs are actively pushing updates keeps the game alive in your mind. It signals that this isn't abandoned, that improvements are happening, and that coming back in even after a break will be worth it. Something I've noticed in communities around games like this is that patches like 0.6.6 often divide players. You'll have one group who say, "This is great, any improvement is welcome, the game feels better now." Then you'll have another group who are like, "Yeah, but where's the new content? Where's the big stuff we've been waiting for?" And both sides have a point. The excitement for new content is real, but the truth is, without patches like this, the big content drops wouldn't feel nearly as good because they'd still be layered over unresolved issues. It's a balance, and I think the devs did the right thing here by releasing a smaller but meaningful update rather than letting issues linger until some giant overhaul months later. One of the things I think about when I see an update like this is how it shapes player behavior. For example, with the invincibility tweak when standing up, you might notice people playing more aggressively because they're not as terrified of getting chain punished. That changes the rhythm of combat and maybe even alters which skills or weapons people gravitate towards. With Excalibur's shockwave being more reliable, you might see more people equipping it, which can ripple out into PvP dynamics or co-op synergy. Even small adjustments can shift the meta in ways you don't always predict right away. And here's something else. By fixing these kinds of issues now, the devs are also setting expectations for how future balance changes will be handled. Players start to trust that if something feels off, there's a decent chance it'll get looked at. That trust is honestly one of the most valuable currencies in gaming. When a player base trusts the devs, they stick around longer, they're more forgiving when things break, and they're more excited when new stuff is announced. So yeah, Palworld version 0.6.6 might not be the flashiest update, but it's one of those patches that quietly strengthens the game. It brings technical stability, fairness in combat, and smoother weapon functionality. And sometimes those subtle fixes are what keep a game healthy long term. Because sure, new content is exciting, but if the base gameplay doesn't feel good, no amount of flashy additions will keep people invested. That's why this patch matters. It's a sign of ongoing care, it's a reassurance that the devs are still paying attention, and it's a reminder that sometimes progress doesn't always come with fireworks. It comes with small adjustments that when stacked together create a smoother, and more enjoyable experience. And honestly, if you've been away from Palworld for a while, this might be a good moment to hop back in. Not because there's some huge new storyline or crazy feature, but because the game itself is a little more polished than it was before.